At 4:45 on July 7th, 1944, Lieutenant Colonel William Joseph O'Brien stood near the center of his battalion's defensive line on the Tanapag Plain in northern Saipan, staring into the darkness as thousands of Japanese soldiers began to move toward him. They were barely 200 yards away. O'Brien was 44 years old. He had spent 24 years in uniform, and he had been fighting on Saipan for 3 relentless weeks. By now, he understood exactly what he was seeing. This was not a probe. This was not a counterattack. This was the largest Banzai charge of the Pacific War. Across the plain, an estimated 4,500 Japanese soldiers, every man still capable of walking, were forming for a final assault. Infantry, walking wounded, support troops, even civilians pressed into service, some armed with nothing more than sharpened bamboo spears. General Yoshitsugu Saito, commander of Japanese forces on Saipan, had given the order. No retreat. No surrender. Die attacking. O'Brien's 1st Battalion, 105th Infantry Regiment, had landed on Saipan's southern beaches on June 16th. The mission had sounded simple on paper: seize the island, build airfields, and bring B-29 bombers within range of Japan. Reality had been something else entirely. Saito had 31,000 defenders dug into the island. Caves honeycombed the volcanic rock. Ridges were fortified yard by yard. Every advance cost blood. By July 6th, O'Brien's battalion, along with the rest of the 27th Infantry Division, had pushed the remaining Japanese into a shrinking pocket at the island's northern tip. But victory had a price. In just 3 weeks, the 1st and 2nd Battalions had taken 650 casualties. 11 rifle companies were reduced to half strength or worse. Some platoons were down to 15 men. O'Brien knew the signs. Captured prisoners had warned them. Intercepts confirmed it. Saito was preparing a final, all-out suicide assault, yokusai, honorable annihilation. The Americans called it a Banzai charge. O'Brien's battalion held a thin defensive line roughly 250 yards from the beach. 1st Battalion anchored the left. 2nd Battalion held the right. Between them was a gap, too wide to close, too dangerous to ignore. O'Brien had asked for reinforcements. There were none. The entire division was stretched thin across the northern plain. Throughout the night of July 6th, Japanese soldiers probed the American line, feeling for weakness. O'Brien walked the perimeter himself, checking foxholes, counting ammunition, ordering extra grenades distributed. Then he gave an order his men immediately understood. Fix bayonets. This would not be a firefight. This would be hand-to-hand. At 4:30, the probing stopped. An unnatural silence settled over the plain. Then O'Brien heard it. Thousands of voices, chanting, singing, screaming, rising out of the darkness. Japanese troops drank sake, shouted prayers, worked themselves into a frenzy. Officers screamed orders. Swords were raised. And then they came. A human wave surged forward, pouring straight through the gap between 1st and 2nd Battalions. Officers led the charge, waving swords, shouting themselves hoarse. Behind them came massed infantry, some with rifles, some with bayonets lashed to sticks, others with rocks, clubs, or bare hands. Major Edward McCarthy, commanding 2nd Battalion, later said it looked like a cattle stampede from a Western movie, except the cattle didn't stop, and they were trying to kill you. O'Brien drew the 2 Colt .45 pistols he always carried, and ran forward. He plunged straight into the mass of his men, firing left hand, right hand, shouting orders, screaming encouragement, telling them to hold the line, not to give up a single inch. The Japanese charge slammed into the American positions. The line dissolved into chaos. Bayonets flashed. Rifle butts swung. Entrenching tools became weapons. Men grappled in the dark, rolling in the dust, choking, stabbing, screaming. Small American pockets were cut off. Others were surrounded. O'Brien kept moving. A Japanese soldier lunged at him with a sword. O'Brien shot him. Another came from the side. O'Brien dropped him too. His presence mattered. If their colonel was fighting in the middle of it, bleeding and firing like any other man, then they could fight too. Then his pistols clicked empty. O'Brien grabbed a rifle from a wounded soldier and kept firing. The Japanese kept coming. A bullet smashed into O'Brien's shoulder, spinning him around. Blood soaked his uniform instantly. Men tried to pull him back. He refused. He fired until the rifle ran dry. And that's when he saw the jeep. About 50 yards behind the line, a Willis Jeep sat angled in the dirt. Mounted in the rear was an M2 Browning, 50 caliber machine gun. The gunner was dead, slumped forward over the weapon. O'Brien turned and ran for it. He had cleared jammed weapons hundreds of times in training. Never like this. Never while standing upright in an exposed Jeep. Never with a bullet wound burning through his shoulder. Never with thousands of men charging straight at him. The eastern sky was turning gray. Dawn was coming. With the light, O'Brien could finally see the scale of it. Japanese bodies lay scattered across the plain. Dozens, then hundreds. But behind them, thousands more were still advancing. The charge had not slowed. It had not broken. It was still coming, screaming, chanting, surging forward with the momentum of inevitability. Then the machine gun stopped. The 50 caliber M2 Browning seized mid-burst. The bolt locked open. The barrel glowed cherry red. Steam rose from the metal. O'Brien slapped the charging handle. Nothing. The weapon was finished. Less than 50 yards away, Japanese soldiers were closing fast, faces visible now, swords raised, bayonets fixed, mouths open in raw, animal fury. O'Brien stood alone in that Jeep with a useless machine gun, blood soaking his sleeve, his battalion splintering around him, and 4,000 attackers still alive. He had seconds. Abandon the Jeep and fall back. Or find another way to fight. He didn't retreat. He yanked the charging handle again. The metal scorched his palm. The bolt refused to move. The barrel radiated heat like a forge. 500 rounds in under 10 minutes had pushed the weapon beyond its limits. The M2 was air-cooled. It was never meant to fire this long without pause. Standard doctrine called for controlled bursts. Cooling intervals. Doctrine hadn't mattered tonight. O'Brien glanced at the barrel. Heat shimmered above it. The gun needed 5 minutes to cool. He had 30 seconds. All around him, the battle had devolved into brutality. American soldiers fought in foxholes hand-to-hand, rifle butts smashing skulls, bayonets plunging into bodies, men grappling in the dirt. Screams mixed with gunfire and explosions. The metallic stench of blood hung in the air. O'Brien jumped down from the Jeep. His boots slammed into the ground. Pain shot through his shoulder. He ignored it. 20 feet away lay a dead American soldier, an M1 Garand beside him. O'Brien sprinted, grabbed the rifle, checked the clip. 3 rounds. Better than nothing. He fired all 3 into the nearest attackers, dropped the empty rifle, and kept moving. Another fallen soldier. Another weapon. A carbine, 15 rounds. O'Brien fired deliberately now, controlled shots. Infantry training from decades earlier took over. Muscle memory replaced thought. But he wasn't just fighting. He was being seen. Men looked up from their foxholes and saw their battalion commander, wounded, exposed, still firing, still moving forward. And they stopped thinking about retreat. Sergeant John Breen, fighting 30 yards away, would later say it looked like O'Brien was immune to bullets, moving through chaos, grabbing weapons from the dead, firing, discarding them, never stopping, never stepping back. The battle had been raging for over an hour. The first wave had shattered the line, but now the Americans were adapting. Artillery batteries still operational were firing canister at point-blank range, ripping entire formations apart. Reserve units counterattacked from the flanks. But the center, O'Brien's sector, remained under crushing pressure. The Japanese weren't trying to survive. They were trying to die usefully. O'Brien's carbine ran empty. He dropped it and grabbed a Thompson submachine gun. Heavy. 45 caliber, 20-round magazine. He fired in short bursts. The Thompson lacked the reach of the 50 caliber, but at this distance it was lethal. All along the line, soldiers fought the same way. No formations, no commands, just isolated pockets of resistance clawing for survival. 200 yards to O'Brien's right, Private Thomas Baker was still fighting. Wounded in the leg, then again in the arm, Baker refused to abandon his foxhole. He fired his Garand methodically, every shot deliberate, every shot killing. As long as Baker fired, the men around him kept fighting. 500 yards behind O'Brien, Captain Ben Salomon, the battalion dentist, faced a nightmare of his own. He had volunteered to run the aid station after the surgeon was wounded. Now Japanese soldiers were storming it, killing wounded Americans on stretchers. Salomon fought back barehanded, with a scalpel, then with a rifle. He ordered the wounded who could move to evacuate. Then he picked up a machine gun. Back on the line, O'Brien's Thompson ran dry. He searched desperately for ammunition. None. The Japanese were pressing from 3 directions now. The sun was fully up. The battlefield lay exposed, horrifying in its scale. And then O'Brien saw it. The Jeep. The .50 caliber. The barrel had been cooling. Maybe long enough. Maybe just barely. O'Brien ran. Pain tore through his body. Blood loss made the world tilt. But he climbed back into that Jeep and seized the charging handle. He pulled. The bolt moved, slowly, reluctantly, but it moved. He chambered a round. Aimed. Fired. 1 round. 2. 3. Then the gun jammed again. The barrel was still too hot. The Japanese were now 40 yards away. O'Brien jumped down again. Grenades. He saw a shattered foxhole piled with them. He grabbed 3. Pulled the pin on the first. Threw. Bodies flew. He threw the second. Then the third. Each explosion bought seconds. But the attack still didn't stop. The ground ahead was layered with bodies. Japanese piled atop Japanese. Americans mixed among them. But still they came, climbing over the dead to reach the line. O'Brien picked up another rifle and kept firing. He no longer thought in words. Only actions. Fire. Move. Reload. Repeat. 24 years of soldiering had narrowed into this single instinct. 200 yards away, Baker was out of ammunition. Surrounded. Still fighting. And O'Brien was already moving toward him. The men who had been fighting beside him were gone. Some were dead. Some had fallen back. Some had simply vanished into the chaos. 30 yards away, Private Thomas Baker was still alive, but barely. A soldier tried to pull him from the foxhole. Tried to drag him back. Baker shook his head. He knew. He was too badly wounded. Too slow. Too heavy. Anyone who tried to carry him would die with him. Baker made a simple request. Prop him against the tree. Give him a pistol. A Colt 1911. 8 rounds. The soldier hesitated. Then he nodded. He set Baker upright, facing the enemy, placed the pistol in his hand, and ran. Baker waited. The Japanese came forward through the smoke and dust. Baker let them close. Then he started firing. 1 shot. 1 man. Every round found its target. 500 yards behind the shattered front line, Captain Benjamin Saipan had mounted a .30 caliber Browning machine gun. The aid station was gone. The wounded had been evacuated. Saipan was alone. He wasn't leaving. He set the machine gun to cover the evacuation route and opened fire on the Japanese soldiers pursuing the wounded Americans. The .30 caliber lacked the brute force of the .50, but at close range it was devastating. Saipan fired continuously. When the enemy adjusted, he moved the gun, found a better angle, fired again. He repositioned 3 times, each move improving his field of fire, each move buying time. He never stopped shooting. Back at the center of the line, O'Brien returned to the Jeep. The .50 caliber had been cooling. 5 minutes. It was his last chance. He climbed into the open rear of the Jeep, grabbed the charging handle, and pulled. The bolt slid forward smoothly. The barrel had cooled just enough. O'Brien chambered a round. Aimed. Fired. The Browning roared back to life. He stood upright again, fully exposed, exactly where enemy fire had already tried to kill him. He didn't care. He swept the gun across the Japanese formation. Whole ranks fell. But something had changed. The charge was no longer surging. Not stopping, but slowing. Momentum was gone. Too many bodies. Too much fire. The wave was breaking. American reinforcements were arriving. Marines from reserve positions. Artillerymen fighting as riflemen. Tank destroyers rolling up from the beach, firing high explosive into packed formations. The tide was turning. O'Brien kept firing. The .50 caliber bucked violently. The Jeep rocked under the recoil. The Japanese were now 30 yards away. Close enough to throw grenades. Close enough to charge with bayonets. O'Brien glanced down. The ammunition belt was nearly gone. Maybe 50 rounds left. Maybe less. The enemy closed to 25 yards. O'Brien fired short, precise bursts. Every round mattered. Men fell, but others stepped over the bodies. The charge was breaking, but not finished. The Jeep's suspension groaned. The tires dug into volcanic soil. The vehicle was never meant for this. The M2 Browning weighed more than the Jeep's rated cargo capacity. Every burst shoved the vehicle backward. O'Brien's shoulder no longer registered pain. Nerves were gone. Blood loss narrowed his vision into a tunnel. Shock was setting in. But his hands stayed steady. Fresh troops from the 4th Marine Division slammed into the Japanese flank. They closed gaps, rebuilt the line. Tank destroyers behind the infantry fired shell after shell into the massed attackers. Bodies flew. Yet the center, O'Brien's position, was still under direct assault. Hundreds of Japanese soldiers surged straight at the jeep. Then the gun went silent. The bolt locked open. Empty. No belts left. O'Brien had fired nearly 800 rounds. The barrel glowed red again. Smoke curled upward. The Japanese were 15 yards away. O'Brien grabbed a rifle from the jeep's passenger seat, jumped down, fired 8 rounds. 8 attackers fell. The rifle clicked empty. He threw it aside, found a bayonet in the dirt, picked it up. 10 yards now. American soldiers saw what he was doing, saw their colonel wounded, alone, holding a bayonet. Men tried to reach him. They couldn't. They were trapped in their own fights. O'Brien stood with his back against the jeep. Blood soaked his uniform. His shoulder hung useless. But he was still standing, still shouting, "Hold the line. Don't give them a damn inch." The Japanese reached him. Swords flashed in the morning sun. O'Brien fought. The bayonet was short, designed for trenches. He used it. Thrust, parry, block. Training from decades earlier took over. But he was exhausted, bleeding, outnumbered. 3 attackers became 5. 5 became 10. The math was merciless. Sergeant Breen saw it. Saw the mass surround the jeep. Saw swords rise and fall. Then the wave moved on. O'Brien lay where he fell. The battle raged for 10 more hours. The charge finally broke near noon. Japanese survivors fled into the hills or killed themselves. By 1800 hours, Tanapag Plain was secured. The cost was staggering. 1st and 2nd Battalions of the 105th Infantry had been nearly destroyed. 406 Americans killed. 512 wounded. Less than 700 combat effective survivors from 1,600 men. Japanese losses were worse. 4,311 confirmed dead. The largest Banzai charge in the Pacific War had failed by minutes. The next morning, American soldiers found O'Brien, still near the jeep, surrounded by 30 dead Japanese soldiers. The bayonet was still in his hand. His eyes were open, facing the enemy. He had not retreated. They found Thomas Baker still propped against the tree. The pistol was empty. 8 Japanese bodies lay in a semicircle before him. Every shot had counted. They found Captain Ben Salomon at his machine gun. He had been hit 76 times, but he had moved that gun 4 times. And 98 Japanese soldiers lay dead in front of it. 3 men, 3 positions, 3 weapons. All made the same decision. Stand. Fight. Buy time. Accept death so others could live. Baker with his 8-round pistol, Salomon with his machine gun, O'Brien with a .50 caliber Browning and a bayonet. All 3 belonged to the same division. All 3 fought in the same battle. All 3 gave everything. The Battle of Saipan ended 2 days later, on July 9, 1944. The island was declared secure. The killing did not stop. In the days that followed, American soldiers and Marines watched in silence as hundreds of Japanese civilians walked to the northern cliffs. Japanese propaganda had done its work. They had been told the Americans would torture them. That surrender meant mutilation. That death was preferable. Families went together. Mothers threw their children into the sea, then jumped after them. The cliffs filled with bodies. The strategic impact of Saipan was immediate and undeniable. From Saipan, B-29 superfortresses could now reach Tokyo. For the first time, the Japanese home islands were within sustained bombing range. The loss was so severe that Prime Minister Hideki Tojo resigned. The Japanese government understood what Saipan meant. The war was lost. The only question left was how many would die before it ended. American losses were catastrophic. Nearly 3,000 killed, more than 10,000 wounded. The 27th Infantry Division, which bore the brunt of the Banzai charge, lost almost 1/3 of its strength. Some rifle companies ceased to exist as fighting units. The division spent 9 months rebuilding before it could be committed to combat again at Okinawa. Japanese losses were annihilating. More than 29,000 defenders killed, almost the entire garrison. Only a few hundred survived. 1 man escaped the slaughter. Captain Sakae Oba led part of the Banzai charge, then withdrew into Saipan's interior with 46 soldiers. He protected 160 Japanese civilians, conducted guerrilla operations, and evaded capture for 16 months. Oba finally surrendered on December 1, 1945. For months after Japan itself had surrendered, Medal of Honor nominations were filed immediately. O'Brien's citation documented everything. June 20th, directing tanks under fire. June 28th, leading an assault on a defended ridge. July 7th, refusing evacuation, manning a jeep mounted. 50 until killed. But the war was still raging. Paperwork moved slowly. Witnesses had to be found. Statements written. Chains of command reviewed. O'Brien's widow waited. His son waited. The men who had fought beside him waited. On May 27, 1945, at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in Troy, New York, the wait ended. Under-Secretary of War Robert Patterson presented the Medal of Honor to O'Brien's widow. The ceremony was held in O'Brien's hometown, the place where he had grown up, where he had joined the National Guard at 18, where he had spent 24 years preparing for a single morning on a volcanic island 7,000 miles away. Private Thomas Baker received the Medal of Honor posthumously at the same ceremony. His family accepted it. The citation described his refusal to withdraw. His last stand. 8 bullets. 8 dead attackers. Captain Ben Salomon was also recommended. The Army rejected it. Salomon was a medical officer, a dentist. Under the Geneva Convention, medical personnel were considered non-combatants. Non-combatants could not receive combat awards, even if they killed 98 enemy soldiers while protecting the wounded. Salomon's case vanished into bureaucracy. Veterans did not forget. For 58 years, men who had witnessed Salomon's actions petitioned, appealed, resubmitted evidence. Finally, in May 2002, President George W. Bush presented the Medal of Honor to Salomon's family. 58 years late, but finally given. 3 men, 3 medals of honor. Same unit, same day, same battle. It had never happened before in American military history. It has never happened again. In November 2009, Troy, New York, erected a memorial at the Rensselaer County Office Building. It honors O'Brien, Baker, and Major General Ogden Ross. All Troy natives, all veterans of the 105th Infantry Regiment, all fighters on Saipan. Replicas of the Medals of Honor are mounted in stone. But the real memorial is simpler. It's the men who survived. The soldiers O'Brien bought time for. The wounded Salomon protected. The ground Baker held. Every man who lived because 3 men stood and fought. The Army analyzed the July 7th Banzai charge immediately. Why had it come so close to success? Why had it ultimately failed? The answers reshaped Pacific War doctrine. Lesson 1. Firepower. Machine guns stopped Banzai charges. Not just any machine gun. The .50 caliber Browning M2 was decisive. Its range, its penetration, its ability to drop a man instantly. The .30 caliber could wound. The .50 killed. O'Brien's Jeep-mounted M2 was improvised. Jeeps were never designed to carry heavy machine guns. The recoil was excessive, the mount unofficial. But when tanks were unavailable, a Jeep mounted. .50 was better than nothing. After Saipan, the Marine Corps standardized Jeep-mounted heavy machine guns for defensive positions. The tactic saved lives at Iwo Jima and Okinawa. Lesson 2. Leadership. O'Brien's presence on the line mattered. Positions near him held longer. Men fought harder when they saw their commanders sharing the risk. Data confirmed it. The Army revised doctrine. Officers were instructed to be visible during defensive actions. Not reckless, but present. Morale and cohesion depended on it. Lesson 3. Ammunition. O'Brien fired roughly 800 rounds in 20 minutes. By doctrine, that was excessive. By reality, it was necessary. The Army increased ammunition allocations for defensive positions. Extra barrels. Better resupply. No more rationing fire during human wave attacks. Lesson 4. No gaps. The Japanese had exploited the gap between battalions perfectly. After Saipan, the 27th Division never allowed gaps again. If they lacked manpower, they shortened the line. Better to defend less ground solidly than more ground weakly. The Banzai charge died at Saipan. The Japanese command understood the math. 4,000 attackers. 4,300 dead. Minimal tactical gain. The exchange was catastrophic. Smaller charges continued later in the war, but none approached Saipan's scale. None succeeded. The defenders had learned. O'Brien's actions became case studies at Fort Benning. His refusal to retreat. his use of improvised firepower, his willingness to die to buy time. Not because he wanted to die, but because he refused to abandon his men. Future officers would study what happened on the Tanapag Plain. They would debate O'Brien's decisions in classrooms and war colleges. They would ask whether he should have remained on the jeep or fallen back, whether the risk was justified, whether one man's courage could truly alter the course of a battle. The answer was not simple. O'Brien died. His death alone did not stop the charge, but his actions bought time. They steadied men who were on the brink of collapse. They cut down dozens of attackers at the point where the line was thinnest. Taken together, O'Brien at the jeep, Baker at the tree, Salomon at the aid station, the line did not break. 3 men, 3 positions, 3 moments where collapse was possible and did not happen. That was enough. Saipan changed the War, not only strategically, by placing Tokyo within range of B-29 bombers, but tactically. American forces learned how to defeat suicidal mass attacks. The Japanese learned that Banzai charges failed against prepared defenses. The mathematics were unforgiving. Machine guns and ammunition defeated fanaticism. Firepower defeated numbers. And on Saipan, one colonel standing in a jeep behind a 50 caliber machine gun proved exactly how decisive that firepower could be. Lieutenant Colonel William Joseph O'Brien was buried with full military honors at St. Peter's Cemetery in Troy, New York. The funeral procession stretched for blocks. World War I veterans marched beside soldiers who had fought on Saipan. The city shut down for the day. Every business closed. Every flag flew at half-mast. O'Brien had been one of their own, a local boy who had spent his entire adult life preparing for a single moment of sacrifice. His widow received the Medal of Honor on his behalf. His son, William Jr., stood beside her. He was 10 years old enough to understand his father was not coming home, old enough to understand what the medal meant, too young to understand why it had to be this way. The 105th Infantry Regiment rebuilt. Replacements arrived. New officers took command. The war moved on. But the men who survived Saipan never forgot what they had seen on the Tanapag Plain. They remembered their colonel standing in that jeep, refusing to retreat after being wounded, fighting with pistols, rifles, grenades, and finally a bayonet, dying where his men were dying. Sergeant John Breen, who fought 30 yards from O'Brien's position, later said it best. Obi was one of the boys that day. He died right on the front line with us. For an enlisted man, there was no higher praise. Not that an officer gave good orders, not that he led well from behind, but that he stood beside them, fought beside them, died beside them. The Willis Jeep O'Brien used was never recovered. It was likely destroyed in later fighting or abandoned as scrap. The 50 caliber Browning machine gun became legend. Some accounts suggest it was recovered and sent to Aberdeen Proving Ground, though records are unclear. Thousands of Brownings served in the Pacific War. Tracking a single weapon through that chaos was nearly impossible. What mattered was not the gun itself. It was what O'Brien did with it. He stood exposed. He fired roughly 800 rounds in 20 minutes. He killed dozens. He bought time. He proved that courage combined with firepower could stop even the largest Banzai charge in history. Today, O'Brien's story lives on. The Patton Museum at Fort Knox preserves exhibits on the 27th Infantry Division, Saipan, and the Medals of Honor awarded to O'Brien, Baker, and Salomon. Troy, New York, maintains its memorial. Every Memorial Day, veterans gather there. Wreaths are laid. Names are read. The city has not forgotten. The National World War II Museum in New Orleans displays extensive Saipan exhibits, including survivor accounts of the Banzai charge and analysis of defensive tactics. One section focuses specifically on jeep-mounted 50 caliber machine guns and their effectiveness against mass assaults. But the most important memorial is not in stone or glass. It is in doctrine. It is in training manuals, in infantry schools, in the lessons that saved lives later at Iwo Jima and Okinawa. O'Brien's sacrifice was not only heroic, it was instructive. Future soldiers learned from it. When to stand, when to fire, and how to hold the line when retreat is no longer an option.